Hey guys, Jonas and Rob here, and today we want to show you something that is referred to as the parallax effect. It looks a little something like this. So the way this is going to work is we're going to be out here taking some fun still images, some pictures, and then I'm going to show you how to work with these pictures and create this kind of 3D illusion, making the pictures come alive sort of thing. This is going to be fun, but cold. Really, really cold. It's actually pretty cool. Hey guys, I'm back in the office and I have downloaded all of the pictures, and now before I begin I just want to touch briefly on what we're dealing with here. Parallax is not a photography and video term to begin with, it's more a physics term that involves how we perceive a three-dimensional space and the objects in it. And also these objects' apparent position depending on how we move. What we're going to be doing here now is create an illusion of a three-dimensional space using flat 2D images. And the programs I'm going to be working with are Photoshop and After Effects, and then also my video editing program, which is Final Cut Pro X. Instead of just sitting here talking, let's just dive right into it and start with Photoshop. Alright, this is the picture that I have selected to work with right now. Rob in mid-air trying to catch two apples. It does look a little bit funny because he's actually looking at the camera and not at the apples he's trying to catch, but I can fix that. I have also opened up this image. It doesn't look like much right now. Rob is already in the water, but I'm going to show you how this is going to be really useful for what we're trying to do today. In Photoshop, the tools I will be working with today are the marquee tool, the lasso tool, the clone stamp tool. This is a great one. And I'm going to start with the pen tool. The first thing you want to do is duplicate your background photo. It's always good to have a copy of your original photo if you want to go back, if you mess something up. So I'm going to be working with my copy and not my original photo. Now we want to create a three-dimensional space. So I want to select out elements in my photo to build a three-dimensional environment. So the first thing I'm going to do is select out the apples using the pen tool. Do it like this. There you can see the outline. Right click and then choose Make Selection. And let's just keep everything the way it's set up. And now we go up and choose the Marquee tool. Doesn't matter which one. And then move over to the apple and right click again and choose Layer via Cut. And now we have a new layer popping up called Layer 1, which is actually our apple. It's been cut out of our background. I'm gonna rename this layer Apple 01. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing with the second apple using the pen tool. Just work around the apple. Right click. Make selection. And then go up to the marquee tool. And just make sure you have the right layer highlighted, otherwise you don't have a whole lot to cut out. And right click on the apple again and layer via cut. Renaming this one Apple 02. Using the pen tool again, I do the same thing to create a Rob layer. And I'm going to speed it up because of all the details. It does take a little bit longer. Here you can see the outline. Right click, make selection. Marquee tool, right click, and layer via cut. And let's rename it to Rob. Now with our new layers, we also created holes in our background that we need to fill in. Here's apple number 1 and here's apple number 2. For these two holes, we're basically going to clone an area next to the hole and paint it over the hole using the clone stamp tool. This is an awesome tool. I have my background layer highlighted. I'm pressing down the Alt key to select an area I want to clone. And then I move the cursor over my hole and basically just start painting. How sweet is that? You can't even tell. For the second apple is a little bit more complex. We have the metal bar and we have the background. So I'm going to start with the bar, clone it, then paint over where I want the bar. And then I'm going to pick a new area to clone over the empty spot. And I can adjust the brush size and shape to get the fine details. Sweet. And now we're going to fill in Rob. And this is when I'm going to use the other picture. So in this picture, you can actually see the whole background that Rob was covering in the first picture. So I'm going to use the lasso tool, highlight an area that I want, copy it, and then simply paste it into my other picture. Now line it up with the original background. One way to make it easier is to drop the opacity of the original image, and then you can see how things line up better. And then we're going to use the eraser tool to feather out the edges of our copied image. This way it's going to blend better with the background. Now we have Rob's feet we have to get rid of, and we also have a couple of holes to fill in. We can easily take out Rob's feet simply using the eraser tool. Look at this, like magic. But before we deal with the 3 holes, I'm going to go ahead and make my selection a part of my original layer. So I'm basically going to combine my layer 1 with the background. If you right click the layer 1 and then hit merge down, it's going to be a part of the layer below it. Easy. And now we're going to go ahead and use the clone stamp tool again to fill in our 3 holes. So remember, you can pick different places to clone to make it look good. Now I'm done with the first step, the Photoshop file. Just have to save it, and then we're going to open it up in After Effects. Okay, I've opened After Effects and I've created a new composition called Parallax Rob. Now I'm going to import the Photoshop file that we just did, and I'm going to import it as a new composition. And I'm going to keep the layers editable. And now I just realized that the names were too similar, so I'm going to rename my composition to Parallax Rob AE for After Effects instead. That was pretty dumb. Okay, so it's a clean composition right now. And I'm going to open up my Photoshop layers and drag my 4 layers, my 4 workable layers into my composition. I'm leaving the original image, the background, because I'm not going to work with it. And I'm going to reorder the layers so that the background's in the background, Rob is next, and then the apples are in front. Easy. The layers are now in the order that I want to work with them, but as you can see, the composition is a lot smaller than what my original image was. So I'm going to scale everything down to make it fit the composition. And now the image looks a little bit more like the original. But the thing is that we're still working with a 2D image. Everything is flat. So we want to make this into a 3-dimensional space. So if you go down here, you see a little icon that looks like a little cube with checkboxes underneath it. I'm going to go ahead and check all of these to make sure that every layer has a cube linked to it. So making them 3-dimensional means that we can move the layers back and forth in the frame as well, and not just sideways or up and down. First thing I'm going to do is work with the background layer. If we click this drop down menu, we reveal the transform options. Position means where we move the layer in space, either along the x-axis, the y-axis, or z-axis. And z is actually the depth. If we look at the layer, it also now has 3 different arrows. If we move the cursor over the arrows, we can see x, y, and z. Z is the blue one, and it's actually pointed right at me. So I can move the layer in 2 ways. Either I can go down to here under position and grab and drag the number, or I can go up to the arrows and do the same thing. Grab the arrow and drag it. As I'm moving the background layer back, you can see that it's not filling the frame anymore, and the way to get around that is to scale the layer up, basically making it larger. And now it fits the frame again, but we know that it's positioned way in the back. Next thing I want to do is work with Rob. Since he's sort of jumping out of frame, I'm going to move him forward a bit. Oh, that's a little too much right there. I'm going to move him back a little bit more, and then I'm going to do the opposite thing. I'm going to scale him down. Just going to change his position a little bit. That looks pretty good. Since I moved Rob forward, the apples are actually right now behind him. You can see that if I'm moving Rob over the apples, they kind of disappear. So it is a little bit difficult to see this when you're just looking at the image from the front. If you go down under the image, it says 1 view. We click that and go to 4 views. We end up getting 4 different windows instead. so we can see our composition from 4 different angles. I like to use the top left one, which allows us to see the composition from above, and also like the bottom right one, which allows us to see the composition from the right. Here now I can see that the background layer is way in the back. The Rob layer, which is highlighted, is in the front, and right in the center we have the 2 apple layers. Looking at your composition like this gives you a good idea where your layers are in space, and it could be really good to go back to this every once in a while to see where your layers really are. And if I grab a layer and drag it, you can really see how it changes in position. Before I start playing around with these layers too much, I just want to say that I'm gonna try and stick to the basics as much as possible, and also understand that whatever numbers I put in and changes I make, they might not work with the project that you're working on. Plus, there's probably a million ways I can do this. It's all a matter of preference. But again, I'm gonna try and make it simple so that you can go and play with this yourself and make it look really cool for your project. Now let's get back to the apples. I'm gonna go back to my 4 view, and I'm gonna move the apples in front of Rob so that he's actually jumping for the apples. Grab a hold of the Z and drag it so that it's in front of the Rob layer. Let's do the same thing with the other one. And then we go back to the 1 view and see what it looks like from the front. This is what it looks like. And one thing I want to point out here is that you can see that the anchor points are not actually on the apples. They're way off to the side. And one thing I want to do to the apples is add a little bit of rotation to them as they're flying through the air. But if I do that with the anchor point off to the side like this, it's not going to look very pretty. So what I'm going to do is double click the apple layers and move the anchor points to the center of the apples. That way it's going to make my life a whole lot easier when I do the rotations. First one done, let's just move that back into position again and then do the second one. Alright, let's move that one back in position and like something like that. Now let's start adding some movement to this thing. The tools I'm going to use here in After Effects are the Unified Camera tool, the Pen tool, and the Puppet Pin tool, the one that looks like a little push pin icon. You're gonna love this one. This is an awesome tool. So let's start by adding a little bit of movement to the composition. What we're gonna do is go up to Layer and then add a new camera layer. For simplicity, let's just keep all the settings the way they are. And what happens is we get a new layer called the Camera 1. If we open up the drop-down menu, we get the transform functions, and they allow us to move with the camera in a 3-dimensional space. The simple camera movement I want to do for this particular picture is a slow slide towards Rob, so the camera will be moving into the frame. I start by adding keyframes, point of interest and position at 2 seconds. I always leave a second or two at the beginning. Don't know why, just always do. And I'm going to add my end keyframes at about 12 seconds, giving myself a 10-second timeline to work with. And just as a warning, at the end of this tutorial, I am going to extend my timeline to about 18 seconds, almost making it double as long as it is now. But for preview and rendering purposes, I try to keep it shorter when I work with it. Now let's add some camera movement. I'm going to grab and drag the Z value, which moves the camera into the frame. Take a quick look by just clicking every second. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. You can see that it's not moving much, but the apples are moving at a slightly different speed than the background. And what I'm trying to create with the picture is this super slow-mo feel of the jump. Now I'm going to start working with each individual layer, and I'm going to start with the first apple. I'm going to add a slight rotation, a Z rotation to the apple. Because we are moving in super slow motion, I just want to add a couple of degrees rotation, not much. It's just going to be really subtle. And I should say that I am planning for every layer to work within the same keyframe timing. So the first keyframes I'm going to put out are going to be the exact same time as the first keyframes for my camera, and the endpoint is going to be the same as well. That's going to make it a whole lot easier when I extend my timeline at the end too. Okay, so I've decided I'm going to keep a 5-degree rotation for the first apple. And now I'm going to do the same thing for apple number 2, but I'm going to spin it 8 degrees and I'm going to spin it the other way, just to vary it up a little. If you're used to taking pictures, you know that not everything is going to be in focus, and I want to try and keep focus on Rob here. So I'm going to add a little bit of a blur to the apples. I'm going to use an effect called Gaussian blur. It's in the effects and presets. I'm going to apply it to the first apple. And I'm just going to set the blurriness value to 1. I'm going to add a little bit of Gaussian blur to apple number 2 as well, but only at 0.3. Alright, now we're going to do something really cool. So if this had been a video clip, even if it was in super slow-mo, if you launched yourself off a dock like that, there would still be some movement. He wouldn't have been completely fixed in midair. In After Effects, there is a tool that can help us do that to 2D objects. That is the puppet pin tool. So let's select this and Rob's layer, and we're going to give Rob some slight movement. With this puppet pin tool, I will now add a couple of points to Rob's body that will simulate body joints, basically points where his body can move or bend. The wrists and elbows, shoulders, his head, his chest, his knee, and his foot. This is the tool that a lot of people use to do GIF animations, so you can obviously get really fancy with this, but I am going to keep it as simple as possible. Now let's take a look at the drop-down menu and see what changed. Under Effects, we have Mesh and we have Deform, and there we find all our 9 puppet pin points. I'm going to set the time indicator to where our camera movement starts in our camera layer. So basically I'm going to start all my changes at the same spot. Working with puppet pin 1, I'm keyframing that spot, and I'm also going to keyframe the end point. And then see what happens when I move puppet pin 1. This one's Rob's left wrist, and it basically allows me to move his hand, making it look like it bends at his elbow where the next puppet pin marker is. And just to show you, if I do the same thing with puppet pin marker number 2, this is how it looks. It rotates around the wrist and the next puppet pin marker up, which is the shoulder. And this of course looks a little bit strange. So now it's all about finding the right amount of movement to do to the different body joints. And since we're moving in super slow-mo, I recommend not going overboard and do too much. And I'm probably not even going to change all of them. I'm just going to make slight adjustments to a couple. Turn the head. Move the hands up a little bit. Push his chest up to make it look like it's flattening out. And then move his foot. All right. And remember, I'm doing all of the changes to the ending keyframe to create that movement from the beginning to the end. I'm going to do one last thing before I render this out. Because Rob is jumping off the dock and he's kind of jumping towards the camera. So I'm going to change his whole position a little bit too. I'm going to have him go up a little bit and also out towards the camera just a little bit. So I'm changing the Y position value for up, and I'm changing the C value for his movement towards the camera. Let's quickly just render it and see what it looks like. So it's starting to look pretty good, but I actually think I can make Rob move a little bit more than he already does, and I'm gonna have his head tip to the other side instead. So all I'm gonna be doing now is make some more fine adjustments to the puppet pin marks. And this usually takes a little bit of time, a lot of patience, and a lot of fine tuning. Let's take a look again. For what I'm trying to do today, I'm pretty happy with this, but there are a few things that I feel I need to adjust. One is Rob's left heel sticking out of his back like a big lump. So I'm going to take that out. And the easiest way to do that is using the pen tool and draw a mask around the area that you want to remove. Now click the drop down menu under the Rob layer, go to mask, and check the box that says inverted. That removes everything that was inside the mask. Now there's one more thing I want to do to Rob. I think his outline looks a little bit too crisp. It's too sharp from when I cut it out in Photoshop. And there's a simple way to fix that. What I'm going to do is duplicate the Rob layer. I'm going to select the layer underneath and I'm going to scale it up just a little bit. Oops, too much. So the Rob layer underneath is going to be a little bit larger than the one on top. Then I'm going to go and apply a Gaussian blur to the bottom Rob layer. I'm going to adjust the blurriness. Let's make it 5. And then you can see that his outline is suddenly a little bit fuzzy. And I think this makes the clip look a little bit more natural. I'm going to do something similar to the background and make the trees in the background be a little bit out of focus. Right now I think the background is a little bit too crisp. So I'm going to do the same thing. Duplicate the background layer. Using the pen tool on the background layer that is on top, I'm going to outline the part of the background that I want to blur out. Then I'm going to apply the Gaussian blur again. Easy, just using one filter this time. And I'm going to change the blurriness to, let's say, 4.5. Then I'm going to go down to the drop down menu of the layer and then the mask, and I'm going to feather the edges of the mask. That way it's going to blend in a little bit better with the other background layer. I'm just going to quickly adjust the mask here. I think that looks pretty good. I think I'm done, except for that one last step that I warned you about in the beginning. I'm going to extend my timeline now from 10 seconds to closer to 20, which means that I'm going to grab the end keyframes of every layer that I've modified to the same end spot. And that includes all of the puppet pins. I know it's a little bit of a pain in the butt, but it was the workflow for this project just to keep the rendering times a little bit shorter. And it did help out. And it doesn't take that long to do. When you're done, we want to export the video clip. So go up to composition, add to render queue, give it a name. And I usually like to export it as an H.264. The file size is a little bit smaller and the quality is good enough for what we do on YouTube. All right, that's it. I know this was a long tutorial, but I hope you liked it, and there are so many ways you can play with this to make some awesome looking parallax video clips. If you're new to this channel, feel free to check out some of the other videos that we have, and if you like what you're seeing, click the subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Alright, thanks for watching and see you in another video.